before the whisper of existence, before the first vibration disturbed the absolute zero of potential, there was only the void. It was not a blackness, for black is a color, a presence. This was an absence so complete, it was a totality. It had no dimension, for there was nothing to measure and no one to do the measuring. It had no temperature, no texture, no scent. It was a perfect, unbroken, and eternal equilibrium of nothing. Yet, to call it nothing is to give it a name, and a name implies a concept, an identity. This was the pre-concept, the canvas before the thought of a canvas. It was a silence not born of the cessation of sound, but a fundamental lack of the very medium through which sound could travel. Imagine a thought that has not yet been formed, a word that exists only as the unplucked string of a silent instrument. That was the state of the all. Within this boundless, featureless state, a tension gathered. It was not a physical tension, but a metaphysical one. The way a perfect vacuum aches for matter, the way a flawless silence seems to yearn for a single defining note. It was the universe holding its breath before it knew it had lungs. This tension began to coalesce, not into points of light or matter, but into principles, into nascent philosophies that would one day govern reality. They were the ghosts of laws, the embryonic urges of physics. And in this slow glacial birthing of what would be, the darkness began to differentiate itself. It developed texture, like the finest grain on an infinite sheet of polished obsidian. It developed a hum, a subsonic vibration that was not a sound but a feeling, the thrum of a cosmos preparing to be born. This was a darkness that had weight and depth. It was layered, like geological strata of non-existence. To drift through it was to feel the pressure of countless unmade possibilities, the ghosts of galaxies that would never form, the echoes of symphonies that would never be composed. The atmosphere was thick with the dust of undreams. A faint luminescence, a kind of phosphorescence of the void itself, began to outline the edges of this nascent reality, a silver frost on a window overlooking an abyss. This was not light, but the memory of light, the promise of a photon. It did not illuminate, it merely defined the edges of the profound, endless shadow. This was the cradle of creation, a place so old it predated the concept of age, a stillness so profound it made the heart of a black hole seem like a raging tempest. It was here, in this patient, waiting dark, that the first true thoughts would begin to stir, not from a mind, but from the fabric of the potential itself. The stage was set, not for a play, but for the invention of drama, of action, of time itself. From the patient, waiting dark, two consciousnesses, or things that would eventually be called consciousnesses, arose. They were not beings in any sense a mortal mind could comprehend. They were principles given will, forces that achieved self-awareness. One called itself the Weaver, and the other the Sculptor. They were born of the fundamental schism in the void, the desire for progression versus the desire for permanence. The Weaver was an entity of cause and effect, of narrative, of the relentless forward march of moments. Its thoughts were threads, spun from the raw potential of the void, each filament a possibility, a choice, a consequence. The Weaver saw existence as a grand tapestry, a story that must be told from beginning to end. Each event knotted securely to the one that came before and the one that would follow. It conceived of time as a loom, a magnificent cosmic machine upon which the story of reality could be woven. Its great work began, pulling the first thread of before and stretching it towards the infinite horizon of after. With this single act, causality was born. The universe gasped its first breath, and the relentless, unidirectional flow of time began, a river carving its path through the stone of eternity. Stars ignited and died along its threads. Galaxies spun like whorls in a fingerprint. Life clung to cooling rocks, all part of the grand, unfolding narrative. The Weaver was a master of sequence, of the beautiful, tragic, and inevitable logic of the story. The Sculptor, however, was an artist of the moment. It perceived existence not as a story to be told, but as a masterpiece to be held. It saw beauty not in the flow, but in the stillness, not in the becoming, but in the being. The Sculptor's medium was the very substance of reality, the clay of the present moment. It would reach into the Weaver's river of time and pull out a single, perfect instant, a supernova blooming like a celestial flower. A lover's first glance, containing an eternity of unspoken promise, the crystalline perfection of a single snowflake just before it melts. The Sculptor would take these moments and preserve them, encasing them in a shell of stasis, removing them from the Weaver's relentless current. It built galleries of these captured instants, halls of frozen perfection where a billion beautiful things were happening all at once, forever. It did not believe in before or after, only in the profound, infinite depth of now. For eons that cannot be measured, for time itself was their plaything, their two projects coexisted in a state of cosmic tension. The weaver wove its linear history, and the sculptor curated its eternal present, but their philosophies were fundamentally incompatible. The weaver saw the sculptor's work as theft, as a mutilation of its story, leaving holes in the tapestry where pivotal moments should be. The sculptor saw the weaver's work as a crime, a relentless act of destruction that washed away every perfect instant, drowning it in the ceaseless flood of the next moment. Their conflict was not one of armies and battles, but of fundamental principles. It was a silent, cosmic war of creation against preservation. And in the throes of one particularly heated act of metaphysical opposition, an accident occurred. The weaver, in a fit of possessive fury, wove a thread of time so dense, so heavy with causality and potential, that it became a singularity of narrative. At the same moment, the sculptor, in an act of defiant artistry, attempted to capture a moment of pure, unblemished creation, the birth of a new physical law. The weaver's thread and the sculptor's grasp collided. It was not an explosion, but an implosion, a folding. The thread of concentrated time did not break. It was snared, pulled from the loom, and simultaneously encased within the sculptor's field of absolute stasis. A loop of linear time was trapped inside a bubble of the eternal now. A wound in the fabric of reality was formed. It was a place where the river of time flowed into a perfectly still pond and never flowed out. It was a paradox given form, a place where one could walk forward and yet remain in the same moment. This cosmic scar, this beautiful, terrible mistake, fell away from the grand conflict, tumbling through the dimensions until it snagged on the gravity well of a young, blue-green planet. There, it settled, taking on a form that the nascent, pattern-seeking minds of that world could comprehend. It became a house. Julian Thorne was a collector, though not of stamps or coins. He collected impossible moments, whispers of places that should not exist. His study was a testament to his obsession, a quiet, dusty room lined with bookshelves that groaned under the weight of apocrypha, forgotten histories, and first-hand accounts of the unbelievable. He had folders thick with yellowed newspaper clippings about rains of fish, annotated maps leading to phantom islands, and tape-recorded interviews with old men who swore they'd seen creatures from forgotten mythologies in the deep woods. For Julian, the world was a thin veneer of the mundane stretched taut over a fathomless abyss of the strange, and he spent his life looking for the cracks. His current obsession, the one that had consumed him for the better part of a decade, was a file labeled simply The Stillwater House. It was a ghost story of a different sort. It wasn't about hauntings or spectral apparitions, but about something far more subtle and disturbing. It was a story about time. The accounts were fragmented, spanning over a century and a half, each one a piece of a puzzle he couldn't quite assemble. The first mention was in the diary of a young poetess from 1888, a Miss Eleanor Vance. She wrote of getting lost in the fog-slicked, gaslit streets of the city's old quarter and stumbling upon a tall, narrow townhouse she had never seen before on a street that wasn't on any map. The air grew still, she wrote, her cursive looping with breathless wonder, and the clatter of the city vanished as if behind a wall of glass. I sought shelter on its porch from a sudden downpour, intending only to wait out the storm. I watched the rain, mesmerized by the pattern of the drops on the cobblestones. It seemed but a moment, the time it takes to compose a sonnet in one's head. Yet when I stepped away, the storm had passed. The streets were bone dry, and the gas lamps had been extinguished by the rising sun. I had lost an entire night to the porch of a silent house. Then there was a police report from 1953, filed by a beat cop who had chased a petty thief into a dead-end alley. The cop, a man named Miller, swore he saw the suspect duck behind a derelict-looking building at the end of the alley. Miller followed, his footsteps echoing on the grimy pavement. He was in the alley for no more than 30 seconds, found no one, and turned back. When he emerged, his partner was frantic. According to the partner, Miller had been gone for 4 hours. His radio was silent. A search party was being organized. The report was dismissed, and Miller was given a desk job after a psychiatric evaluation. He never mentioned the house again, but the address he gave for the derelict building was a vacant lot, and had been since the Great Fire of 1901. Julian had dozens more. A child's drawing of a forever house where he played with his toy soldiers for a whole day while his mother claimed he was only missing for 5 minutes. A frantic letter from a university student in the 1980s to his professor, describing how he and his girlfriend had entered the house on a dare, spent what felt like a weekend exploring its dusty, silent rooms, only to emerge into the same evening, mere moments after they had entered, their watches and the setting sun in agreement. His girlfriend, he wrote, was inconsolable, convinced she had aged, that she could feel the phantom weight of unborn children and a life unlived within her. The tension in Julian wasn't a sudden fright, but a slow, creeping accretion of obsession. He had cross-referenced every account, trying to triangulate the house's appearances. It was never in the same place twice, but it always manifested within the city's oldest, most labyrinthine district. And it seemed to appear most often during moments of transition in the twilight hour, during a sudden change in weather, in the liminal space between sleep and waking. He felt he was getting closer, not to a location, but to a state of being, a specific frequency he needed to tune into. One rain-swept October evening, sitting in his study with the city lights blurring into watercolor streaks on his windowpane, he felt it, a pull, a subtle resonance in the air, a silence that fell between the patter of the raindrops. He didn't think, he simply knew. He grabbed his coat, his leather-bound journal, and a heavy, brass-cased watch, and walked out into the night. The hunt was over. The invitation had been extended. The rain fell in sheets, a relentless percussive drumming that turned the city into a world of shimmering black glass and bleeding neon. Julian walked, not with a destination in mind, but with a sense of being reeled in by an invisible line. He moved through the familiar streets of the old quarter, but they felt alien tonight. The landmarks subtly rearranged, the alleys deeper and darker than he remembered. He found himself on a narrow, cobbled lane he had never seen before, a place inexplicably sheltered from the wind. The sound of the rain softened to a hush. The air grew thick and still, tasting of wet stone, ozone, and something else, something ancient, like the dust from a long-sealed tomb, and there it was. At the end of the lane, where there should have been a brick wall, stood a house. It was a tall, gaunt structure of dark, weathered stone, a sliver of Victorian severity wedged impossibly into the city's fabric. It had a single, steep gable that seemed to pierce the low-hanging clouds. Its windows were dark, vacant eyes staring out into the rain. There was no sign of life, no light, no sound from within. It was utterly, profoundly silent, as if it existed inside a vacuum. It was the Stillwater House. Julian felt a tremor pass through him, a thrill that was equal parts terror and elation. This was the culmination of his life's work, the mythical beast he had tracked for so long. His approach was slow, deliberate. Each footstep on the slick cobblestones was a conscious act. The brass handle on the heavy oak door was cold and smooth beneath his trembling fingers, worn down by hands that may or may not have ever existed. He expected it to be locked, to resist, but it swung inward at his touch with a low, resonant groan that seemed to be absorbed by the oppressive silence within. He paused on the threshold, a man standing on the shore of an ocean of stillness. The air that flowed out was not cold, but it was devoid of warmth. It was utterly neutral, carrying the scent of dry paper, desiccated flowers, and the faint metallic tang of ionized air. He checked his brass watch, 11:17 p.m. He took a deep, steadying breath and stepped inside, pulling the heavy door closed behind him. The click of the latch was the last sound from his world. It was instantly swallowed by a silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure against his eardrums. He was in a grand foyer. A sweeping staircase, its banister thick with a velvet rope of dust, curved up into impenetrable darkness. The air was motionless. He could see his own breath misting before him, each plume hanging in the air for an unnaturally long time before slowly, reluctantly, dissipating. Moonlight, filtered through a large, grime-caked Palladian window above the door, cast a ghostly silver-blue light across the scene. It was in this strange, spectral light that he first noticed the dust. It was everywhere, a thick, uniform blanket of gray-brown powder covering the floor, the furniture, the very air itself. But it was not ordinary dust. It did not swirl or drift. It was settled, quiescent. He walked into what must have been a parlor. Shapes of furniture loomed under pale dust cloths like sleeping giants. A grand piano, its lid closed. A collection of high-backed chairs, arranged as if for a conversation that had ended centuries ago. In the center of the room, a grandfather clock stood silent, its pendulum a frozen teardrop of brass, its hands pointing resolutely to 3:10. Julian's heart hammered in his chest, a frantic, fleshy drumbeat in the cathedral of quiet. He felt a profound sense of intrusion, as if he had walked into a photograph. His attention was drawn to a single shaft of moonlight that cut through the gloom, illuminating a column of air in the center of the room. And within that column, a universe of dust motes hung, perfectly, impossibly still. They were not falling. They were not rising. Each tiny speck was a suspended star in a miniature galaxy fixed in place. He approached, his movements slow and careful, feeling like an astronaut in zero gravity. He stared at a single, particularly bright mote, a flake of what might have been skin, or paper, or time itself captured in the pale beam. He watched it, and the house began its work. As he focused on the mote, the world outside of it dissolved. His perception narrowed to that single, unmoving point of light. He thought he was observing it for a second, perhaps two, but in that perceived second his mind unspooled. An entire train of thought, fully formed, entered his consciousness. He thought about the composition of dust, about the life of the person who might have shed the skin cell, their hopes, their fears, their unremembered breakfast on a Tuesday morning in 1922. He then considered the physics of the house, formulating a dozen complex theories of temporal mechanics and localized gravitational distortion. He mentally composed a letter to a colleague detailing his findings with academic precision. He felt the phantom weight of the pen in his hand, the scratch of the nib on paper. Then, his own memories began to surface, not as fleeting images, but as fully immersive experiences. He was a boy again, feeling the summer sun on his face as he lay in a field of tall grass, watching the clouds drift by. The feeling was so real, so complete, that he could smell the clover and feel the tickle of a ladybug on his arm. He lived that afternoon again, every lazy, golden minute of it. Then he was a young man, experiencing the sharp, bittersweet pain of his first heartbreak, the entire relationship playing out in his mind's eye from its hopeful beginning to its sorrowful end. He felt the phantom tears on his cheeks. He lived through failures and triumphs, through long, boring winters and fleeting, ecstatic summers. Decades of his own life, memories he had long forgotten, bloomed and faded in his consciousness. It was not like remembering, it was like reliving, all while his eyes remained fixed on the unmoving mote of dust. He felt a subtle shift in his body. A dull ache bloomed in his left knee, the ghost of an old football injury, then vanished. The faint lines around his eyes seemed to deepen. The skin of his hands felt thinner, more papery. Then, the feeling receded, and he felt a surge of youthful energy, a sense of limitless potential he hadn't felt in 30 years. The house was not just showing him time, it was playing with his own. He was a stone in its still pond, and the ripples of his own life were echoing back and forth across his flesh. With a monumental effort of will, he tore his gaze away from the dust mote. The spell was broken. He stumbled back, gasping, his breath creating a fresh, turbulent cloud in the static air. His mind felt vast, ancient, stuffed with the weight of 100 lived lifetimes. His limbs were heavy. He felt an exhaustion so profound it was bone deep. How long had he been standing there, staring at a speck of dust? 5 minutes 10 at the most. He fumbled for his watch. The hands had barely moved. It read 11:28 p.m. He had been inside for 11 minutes. A sudden, primal fear, cold and sharp, cut through his exhaustion. He lurched towards the nearest window, his hands clumsy as he wiped away a thick layer of grime. He peered outside. The rain had stopped. The cobblestones of the impossible lane were not just dry, but dusty. And the sky. The sky was not the inky, clouded black of a stormy night. It was a pale, pearlescent gray, tinged with the softest blush of rose and gold along the horizon. A bird sang a single clear note. It was dawn. He looked at his watch again, 11:28 p.m. It was still ticking, a faithful machine lying to him in a place where mechanical time was a meaningless joke. He had lost the entire night. 7 hours, gone, consumed in the space of 11 minutes, all spent watching a single mote of dust hang in a beam of moonlight. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized him. It was not the fear of a ghost or a monster, but the existential terror of a fundamental law of the universe being casually, effortlessly broken. The house was not a passive anomaly, it was a predator, and its prey was time itself. Julian's time. He scrambled back to the foyer, his movements clumsy and loud in the suffocating silence. The dust on the floor rose in gentle, slow-motion clouds around his feet, refusing to settle, a sign that his presence had irrevocably disturbed the stasis. The grand staircase seemed to lean down towards him, its shadows deeper, more menacing. The air, which had been neutral, now felt heavy and viscous, like he was moving through water, each step an act of frantic effort. He reached for the great oak door, his hands slapping against the cold, unyielding wood. The brass handle, which had turned so easily before, was now stiff, resistant. He threw his weight against it, his shoulder colliding with a dull, sound-absorbing thud. The house was holding him. It was not a malicious act, he felt, but an inertial one. He was a foreign object in its perfectly balanced system, and its profound stillness was a force he had to overcome, like trying to run in a dream. He grunted, his breath tearing at his raw throat, and pulled with all his strength. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. The world was frozen solid. Then, with a groan that sounded less like wood and more like the tearing of old parchment, the latch gave way. He spilled out onto the cobblestones, falling to his hands and knees. The morning air was a shock to his system, a sudden, violent immersion. It was bitingly cold, crisp, and clean, and it smelled of damp earth and the distant city, waking up the faint scent of diesel fumes and baking bread. The contrast with the dead, sterile air of the house was so stark it made him gag. The sounds crashed over him in a wave. The distant rumble of the first train of the day, the chirping of sparrows, the rustle of wind in a skeletal tree at the end of the lane. They were the most beautiful sounds he had ever heard. He lay there for a long moment, chest heaving, pressing his palms flat against the rough, cold, blessedly real stones of the street. He pushed himself up, his joints aching with a weariness that felt ancient, and turned. The house was gone. Where the tall, gaunt Victorian structure had stood, there was now only the soot-stained brick wall of an old warehouse, glistening with the last vestiges of the night's rain. The impossible lane itself was gone, replaced by a mundane, garbage-strewn alley he recognized. The world had snapped back into place, erasing the anomaly as if it had never been. There was no evidence he had been anywhere but here, a man who had perhaps slipped and fallen in a dark alley. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling too much to work the screen properly on the first try. The time displayed in bright digital numerals was 6:35 a.m. He looked at the brass-cased watch still strapped to his wrist. It read 11:29 p.m. The discrepancy was a physical blow. 7 hours and 6 minutes of his life had been scooped out, leaving a hollow space he could feel in the pit of his soul. He felt unmoored, a ship whose anchor line to the river of time had been frayed. The world around him, so solid and reassuring just moments ago, now felt thin, fragile. The people he would soon see on the streets, the cars that would rush by, they were all moving according to a clock that he was no longer fully synchronized with. He had stepped outside the story, if only for a moment, and now he was a character who had read ahead, or perhaps fallen several pages behind. The sun, now a brilliant orange disk above the rooftops, felt alien, the light of a star he was seeing from a strange new angle. He was back, but he had not returned unchanged. He was a living paradox, a man whose internal clock and external reality were now two different, competing truths. The days that followed Julian's return were a study in quiet dislocation. The profound weariness he felt leaving the house did not fade with sleep. It was a deeper fatigue, a temporal jet lag from which there was no recovery. He walked through his life as if in a waking dream, the world around him seeming both too fast and too slow at the same time. The mundane rhythm of the Sidith morning rush hour, the lunchtime crowds, the slow bleed of afternoon into evening felt like a frantic, meaningless dance. He had seen time stilled, and now its constant, hurried passage seemed absurd, even vulgar. The true consequences began to manifest in subtle, deeply unsettling ways. He found himself experiencing temporal echoes. While pouring a cup of coffee, he would see a phantom after-image of the cup falling and shattering on the floor a split second before his hand actually slipped. He would be in the middle of a sentence and have a powerful sense of déjà vu, the unnerving certainty that he had lived this exact moment before, not in a dream, but just a moment ago, as if his personal timeline were skipping like a scratched record. Conversations became confusing loops. A friend would ask him a question, and he would hear the faint echo of the same question being asked again before the sound had even faded. His own reflection became a source of dread. Most of the time, he looked the same, but occasionally, for a fleeting, heart-stopping instant, he would catch a glimpse of an older man staring back from the mirror. A man with deeper lines etched around his eyes and mouth, with more silver threaded at his temples, his gaze carrying the weight of years Julian had not yet lived. The vision would vanish as quickly as it came, leaving him staring at his normal face, his heart pounding with the chilling proof that the house had imprinted upon him its chaotic relationship with age. He was a living archive of his own potential pasts and futures. The world of his obsession, the collection of impossible moments, no longer held the same academic thrill. It was now his reality. He was one of them, another fragmented account in a dusty file. He tried to write down his experience, to put into words the feeling of living a lifetime while watching a dust mote, but the language failed him. How do you describe the texture of a moment stretched into an eternity? How do you explain the sound of absolute silence? His notes became rambling, philosophical treatises on the nature of perception and the conflict between being and becoming. He wrote of the weaver and the sculptor, not as a myth he had invented to explain the house, but as entities he felt he had genuinely perceived in the house's profound stillness. He had not just visited an anomaly, he had touched the very foundations of the cosmos, the metaphysical argument from which reality was born. The house was not an empty place. It was saturated with the sculptor's philosophy, a temple to the infinite majesty of now, and it had baptized him in its waters. He was no longer just a character in the weaver's story. He was now also a statue in the sculptor's gallery, a man forever frozen in the memory of that timeless moment. The silence of the house had followed him home. Not the absence of noise, for his life was filled with the sounds of the city, but a deeper internal quiet. A pocket of the house's stasis had lodged itself in his soul. It was a place of profound stillness he could retreat to in his own mind, a place where the relentless ticking of the clock faded into irrelevance. In this internal sanctuary, he could perceive the world differently. He saw the intricate patterns in the chaos of daily life, the beautiful, fleeting moments of perfection that the sculptor would have cherished, the geometric grace of a pigeon taking flight, the ephemeral swirl of cream in a cup of black coffee, the genuine, unguarded smile of a stranger. He had been given a terrible gift to see the world through the eyes of both the weaver and the sculptor, to appreciate both the arc of the story and the beauty of the single frozen frame. He no longer searched for cracks in the world, he was a crack. He was a walking, breathing, temporal anomaly. People he met felt it, even if they couldn't name it. They would grow flustered in his presence, losing their train of thought, checking their watches instinctively. They felt the subtle wrongness of him, the faint aura of a place where time did not behave. He was a ghost from a different kind of history, one written in moments, not years.